My daughter said I'd get nothing from Mom's $100 million. At the will reading, she turned pale when she heard my name. He's still breathing? Thought he'd be gone by now. Maybe we should check his pulse while reading. That was the first thing I heard when I came downstairs, still wearing black, still smelling faintly of the roses from my wife's funeral. They had barely tossed the last shovel of earth before the family gathered back at the estate. Not for mourning, not for memories, but for the feast and the fortune. The hallway buzzed with voices, laughter, and the soft thump of shoes marching through what used to be my sanctuary. I stood at the foot of the stairs, gripping the banister my wife once polished by hand, and watched them divide up my life like vultures around a carcass. This one's mine. My grandson slapped a neon green sticky note onto the grandfather clock, then the leather armchair, then the cabinet with our wedding china. He moved like a man in a showroom claiming prizes he hadn't earned. His sister pointed her phone at the wall, an app open with blueprints and measuring lines. "We'll remodel this once he's out," she said to no one in particular. "Home gym, maybe. Definitely better lighting." I kept standing there. No one offered a chair. No one paused. Instead, my son-in-law appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. "We're celebrating Mom's legacy," he said cheerfully. "She built an empire, and now we get to carry it forward. And clean out the ghosts," someone muttered. Laughter erupted. My chair at the dining table was gone, replaced with a folding one, dragged in from the garage. One leg wobbled. No cushion. They pointed me toward the mudroom instead. "You'll be more comfortable there, away from the noise." I sat in silence, facing a mop bucket and a broken broom with a paper plate of dry chicken and overcooked potatoes. No one noticed. No one looked. From the other room, I could hear them. "This house smells like mothballs and death," said one voice. "Let's strip the wallpaper and gut the kitchen." My grandson peeled off a bright orange sticker and slapped it onto the sideboard beside me. "This one's mine," he said, grinning as if he'd won a prize at the fair. His sister walked in with her phone open using some kind of room scanning app. "We'll remodel this once he's out," she said, turning slowly in place. "Man cave maybe, or a wine cellar." They didn't whisper. They didn't even glance at me. I sat very still, holding my tea with two hands so it wouldn't shake. Mom said he'd die before her. Came another. Guess that was her only mistake. She built an empire. He built dinner, someone added, and the laughter grew louder. "Let him rot with the memories," a cousin sneered. "He doesn't even know what year it is. Can we keep his pension checks if we forward his mail for a bit?" My granddaughter joked. "God, he's half dead already," her brother said. "Let's just give him the garden shed and be done with it." I took a bite of cold chicken. It tasted like chalk. I swallowed it anyway. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. But I reached into my sweater pocket and felt the crisp edges of the document I had kept safe for years. A bank memorandum signed and notarized, dated 20 years ago. It declared me as co-founder and early investor in the family trust. My name was there, inked in blue, not black, the kind of detail that matters in court. They didn't know. They never asked. Back then, when the company was drowning and bankruptcy loomed like a shadow, it wasn't lawyers or accountants that saved it. It was me. I sold every piece of value I owned: my father's vintage car collection, my investment portfolio, even the lakefront property I'd inherited. I didn't tell anyone. I just wired the money and whispered to my wife, "Use it, but don't ever let them know it came from me." She didn't until now. I heard my daughter's voice in the next room. "We'll get the vacation home. The yacht's already under my name anyway." "The Tesla is mine," someone else called. "Mom said I could have it last Christmas." "I want the designer handbag collection," the youngest said. "Even if there is gifts to her, she's not using them." More laughter. They were dividing up my skin while I was still breathing inside it. One of them walked into the mudroom, looked surprised to see me still sitting there, and said casually, "There's bottled water in the garage fridge. Maybe grab one. You look pale." Then he left, not waiting for an answer. I stayed seated for another hour while they picked apart the art, the land, the memories. Someone even started dragging suitcases upstairs, claiming the master bedroom for the weekend. One of the girls asked if they could paint it teal. At some point, the champagne ran out and the music turned off, but the smell of greed still lingered, thicker than the dust on the drapes. I rose slowly. My knees ached. I steadied myself on the edge of the sink and looked out the small window above it. The roses my wife planted along the driveway were starting to wilt. No one had watered them in days. I wondered if anyone even noticed. I walked back into the house. Not that anyone asked where I had been. My footsteps were light like the ghost they believed I already was. But I was not done. Not yet. I clutched the paper in my pocket, warm now from the heat of my palm. Let them drink. Let them decorate. Let them joke. The reading of the will was coming, and I had a pulse, a loud, steady, undeniable one. They look at me now like I'm a burden, a ghost, a shadow in their perfect story of success. But there's a chapter they erased because it didn't fit their version. The one where I saved everything and no one ever knew. 20 years ago, the company was crumbling. I remember the way my wife came home late, blazer wrinkled, hands trembling, silence heavier than words. She didn't need to tell me. The creditors had called. The numbers didn't lie. They were on the verge of losing everything: the clients, the contracts, even the house. "We just need one deal," she said, eyes fixed on the fireplace like she could burn the shame out of herself. "Just one. If we can close with those investors in Seattle, it'll turn around." But there was a problem. To lock in the deal, she needed collateral. Money she didn't have and pride she refused to put aside. So I made a choice. That night while she slept, I liquidated everything. The car collection my father had spent decades building. The tech stocks that had tripled in value. The lakefront property where I dreamed of retiring. Every asset had weight, and I sold them all quietly, without asking, without telling. I wired the funds directly to the company's escrow account the next morning and told her only one thing: use it. Don't let them see you fall. She didn't ask where the money came from. She didn't want to know. That was her way: strong on the outside, silent on the inside. And I stayed behind the curtain. The deal closed 2 days later. The investors signed. The company lived. They called her visionary. They called her a self-made miracle. They never called me. But that wasn't the part that hurt the most. A month later, I saw the new branding materials. Her face bold on the front page, a slogan underneath, built by determination alone. I smiled when I saw it, bit my lip, said nothing. But I remember everything. Even the night I wrote the expansion strategy by hand. She was preparing for another investor meeting and didn't know where to begin. The market was shifting. The industry was changing, and she was still pitching like it was 2000. So after everyone went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile and started to write. I outlined a multi-phase digital transformation strategy based on emerging trends, projected shareholder value, and a scalable growth model tied to e-commerce integration. I had done it before in another life, before marriage, before babies, before the business card that said homemaker. That night, I signed the document with a name no one would recognize. A pen name, something harmless, something clean. And the next morning, I sealed it in an envelope, stamped it, and mailed it to the office. No return address, just her name and the company's. She received it 2 days later. At dinner that night, she mentioned a brilliant proposal someone had sent anonymously. "It's genius," she said, laughing. "Even the handwriting looks familiar, like yours." I shrugged and kept stirring the pasta. That proposal became the foundation of their digital expansion 6 months later. It brought in over $50 million in new revenue. They hung a plaque in the lobby. "Innovation through vision." Her vision. But I didn't mind. Not then. I told myself the family needed one hero, and it was better to let her be it. It's funny the way men are taught to disappear gracefully, to take pride in being the foundation while someone else gets the credit. We're told that quiet support is noble, that sacrifice is strength, but silence too long becomes erasure. And now they walk through my house taping their names onto furniture, speaking of legacy like I was never part of it. Now they laugh at my memory, question my mind, mock my usefulness. They don't know what I gave, what I built, what I hid. There's a folder upstairs in my closet beneath the linens no one ever touches. Inside is the original draft of that proposal ink, slightly smudged from a night of restless hands. My pen name in the corner. Folded next to it is a letter from the Copyright Office, one that ties the strategy to a registered intellectual property filing. Registered not under the company, but under me. I never cashed the royalty checks. They come quarterly, have for years. I never needed the money. I needed the quiet. I needed the dignity of knowing what I had done, even if no one else did. But now they've drawn a line in the sand. They fed me shame. They stripped me of memory. They called me dead while I still breathed. So I've opened the folder again. I've spoken to the lawyer. I've hired the handwriting analyst. I've documented everything. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but for truth. Because when they sit in that room and the will is read, and they hear my name tied not just to the trust, but to the legacy they thought was theirs alone, there will be silence. For once, I will be loud, and not one of them will be able to erase me again. They didn't even look me in the eyes when they did it. It was a Tuesday, 5 days after the funeral. The house still smelled faintly of lilies and pine from the casket spray. Someone had left the condolence cards on the piano, unopened, as if even grief was too inconvenient to process. But their energy had shifted. The mourning was over. Now came the sorting, the claiming, the clearing. And the clearing began with me. "We've decided it's best," Rebecca said, not bothering to lower her voice. "He can move to the small room downstairs." I blinked. The utility room. Technically, it's a storage space, she corrected with a tight smile. But there's room for a cot. Our bedroom was already gone. I could hear the activity upstairs. Drawers pulled open, closet doors creaking. Someone was rolling a suitcase down the hallway. My belongings, my books, my clothes, my personal items, they were being packed into cardboard boxes. Not carefully, not lovingly, just removed. I shuffled slowly toward the stairs, only to see labels stuck to the boxes. Donation. Another. Outdated. A third. Trash. They didn't even have the decency to hide the labels. Rebecca's husband, my daughter's son-in-law, was holding a clipboard and gesturing toward furniture like a man directing a moving company. "That console table is perfect for our place," he said to his wife. "Put a sticker on it." A neon pink post, its note appeared like a bruise on the walnut surface. "This one's mine." I watched as my memory was claimed piece by piece. The wedding china. The recliner where I watched my daughter take her first steps. Even the old turntable, the one we danced to during blackouts, was now marked with the same cheerful tag. Rebecca turned to me with that sharp, polished smile she wore like armor. "He doesn't need a room," she said to the group. "Just a bed until, well, you know." A few awkward chuckles followed. No one said anything. One of the younger ones, Ethan, I think, whispered something as he passed by the kitchen door. "If we keep his address active, we can still collect his pension deposits." They laughed at that one. I didn't. I simply walked slowly, knees stiff, to what used to be the utility room. It smelled like cleaning supplies and mildew. A single bare bulb flickered overhead. There was a plastic bucket in one corner and a rusted sink. A cot had been pushed against the wall. No sheets, just an old blanket. That was to be my room. My suitcase had already been placed beside it. A thermos. A framed photo cracked in the corner sat on top. I picked it up. It was from our 30th anniversary. We were standing in front of the rose garden, my wife's arm around me, my hand on her waist. Behind us, the house stood tall and proud. Back then, it had felt like ours. But now that same photo had been pulled off the hallway wall and stashed behind the water heater. I found it when I went to get some water face down, wedged between cleaning supplies. They didn't even want to look at it. Did they think I wouldn't notice? Or did they think I'd forget? They forget that I remember everything. I remember the night my wife and I planted the rose garden together. I remember the scent of cinnamon rolls on Christmas mornings. I remember holding my daughter as she cried over her first heartbreak, whispering, "You're still enough." I remember countless birthday parties, midnight hospital runs, hand-painting the nursery to make this house feel like a home. But now I'm just a placeholder, a logistical burden, something to step over on the way to an inheritance. Rebecca stopped by my cot later that evening with a folded towel and a travel-sized bottle of generic shampoo. "These are for you," she said, setting them down like charity. We'll have dinner around 7. You can eat after we're done. I nodded. That's all I could do. That night, while they laughed over steaks and wine in the dining room, I sat on the cot, opening a can of soup I'd hidden from the pantry. I had to use the edge of a key to pry it open. No can opener had been left for me. They say I built dinner. I whispered to myself. That's what they whispered earlier when they thought I wasn't listening. Mom built an empire, once said. He built dinner. As if nourishment wasn't a foundation. As if care and sacrifice meant nothing because it didn't show up in a quarterly earnings report. I built dinner, yes, but I also built them. And now they are tearing me down with giggles and tape and tiny neon stickers. The cruelty is never loud. It's quiet, surgical, polite, but it cuts just the same. Later, when the house went still, I carefully pulled the anniversary photo back into my hands. I wiped the dust off the glass. I pressed it to my chest. This was once my home. I was once the heart of it. They may think they've erased me, but they've only reminded me of what I once gave and what I can still take back. And tomorrow, the lawyer calls, and I will answer with the voice they forgot I had. It started with a folder-old, worn, leather-bound. I kept it beneath the loose floorboard in the utility room, now my bedroom, behind cleaning supplies no one ever touched. Inside were things they never thought to ask about because they never asked about me. The morning after they measured my room for conversion plans, I took the folder and walked 2 blocks in the cold to the pay phone outside the pharmacy. They'd canceled my cell service by mistake, but I hadn't forgotten the number. When Mr. Alden picked up, I simply said, "It's time." He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "Come in tomorrow." Mr. Alden had been my wife's lawyer for decades. But what they didn't know is he had also been mine long before the marriage became a performance. Long before I faded into the background. The next day in his office, I laid out the documents one by one. First, the joint trust certificate. My name was right there beside my wife's. Not as a witness, not as a dependent, as co-founder, co-executor. Then the investment agreement from Pacific Trust Bank, dated 20 years ago. It clearly showed the deposits, my assets, my father's car collection, the proceeds from the lakefront property. I sold them all quietly when my wife's company faced collapse. The money bought her the merger that saved her firm. I never asked for credit. I only asked for her to survive it. Last, I slid forward a bundle of handwritten pages yellowed with time, corners curled. Each one bore a familiar slant of cursive. "It's the original strategy proposal," I said softly. "The model for the digital expansion." Mr. Alden's eyes narrowed. "You wrote this?" I shook my head. I sent it. I sent it with a pseudonym. She submitted it under her name. I remembered that night clearly. My wife had been pacing the study, untouched coffee growing cold on the desk. Her board had rejected every draft she'd shown them. I sat up in bed after she'd gone to sleep, pulled out a notepad, and wrote until dawn. By morning, my hand ached from writing. I never told her it was mine. I mailed it to the business P.O. box with no return address. She presented it at the next board meeting as her own. They approved it unanimously. It generated $50 million in new revenue, and I never said a word. Mr. Alden leaned closer. "May I?" He pulled out a file from his cabinet and removed a small envelope. Inside was another letter typed, but signed L. Montgomery, the same pseudonym I'd used on the handwritten version. I watched as he compared the signature. "Do you still write like this?" he asked. I nodded. He called in a specialist that very afternoon, a document examiner from the university. They spent 2 hours together, analyzing handwriting patterns, ink composition, paper aging. Later that week, the examiner sent a report. The documents were a match, 100%, and the original work contained intellectual property protections. Copyright and authorship belonged to me. According to federal copyright law, the strategy, the framework for the digital expansion, was considered proprietary intellectual property because it had never been formally transferred, and I could prove authorship. The licensing rights defaulted back to me. Substantial royalties, possibly more, depending on continued implementation. All mine. Mr. Alden looked at me across the polished wood of his desk and said, "You understand what this means?" I nodded. "I don't want all the money," I said. Not all of it. What do you want? I folded the letter back into the folder and stood. I want my voice back. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile. A small, knowing smile that began in my chest and curled its way to my lips. They made me sit at the end of the table, a folding chair, of course, because heaven forbid I clash with their designer aesthetic. The law office was modern, full of glass walls and leather trim, cold in every way. Outside, it was raining. Inside, it might as well have been snowing. My daughter Rebecca sat nearest to the front, legs crossed confidently, diamond earrings catching the light. Her husband whispered something in her ear. She chuckled just loud enough for the room. "He'll be dead by spring," she muttered, sipping from a complimentary coffee cup. "Don't expect anything for him." My granddaughter was texting under the table. My grandson was doodling on a legal pad. None of them looked at me. Mr. Alden walked in, briefcase in hand, and everyone straightened. He always carried the air of finality with him, a man whose voice usually meant the end of a question. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today we are here to execute the final wishes of Mrs. Elizabeth Chun as stated in her legally binding revised will." No one noticed the slight emphasis on the word revised. A few folders were passed out, some pages were turned, and then Mr. Alden reached into his case and removed a small digital recorder. He clicked it on. My wife's voice filled the room slower than I remembered, more tired, but clear, calm, measured. "If my daughter ever speaks ill of her father," she said, "deduct $1 million per documented instance." Silence. The breath left the room like a vacuum had been turned on. The voice continued. "The recordings will show how many she owes." There was a moment of stunned stillness, followed by the clack of a pen falling from Rebecca's hand. "What the hell does that mean?" she asked, sitting forward. "That's not real. That's not in the..." Mr. Alden held up one hand and slid forward a printed transcript. The heading read, "Exhibit A, audio transcript, home security system, kitchen 3 days after funeral." He turned the page. 1. He's still breathing. 2. Thought he'd be gone by now. 3. Check his pulse at the will reading. 4. She built an empire. He built dinner. He kept going. 73 total recorded statements deemed disparaging of her father. At $1 million per statement, Mr. Alden concluded, that totals $73 million in deductions. The remaining discretionary penalties as per Clause 14C bring the total to $76 million in deductions. He turned the final page. Remaining inheritance for Ms. Rebecca Chun, $8,000. Rebecca leapt from her seat. "This is insane. You can't do this. That man, he's been living off her for years." "Mom wouldn't." "She would," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken all morning. Everyone turned. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Mr. Alden continued, calm as ever. "Now, as for the primary beneficiary of the trust, the business interests, and remaining estate assets, Elizabeth Chun has left them to her husband, David Chun." He handed me the folder. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were the deeds, the portfolio transfers, the intellectual property rights tied to the digital expansion strategy. A second folder smaller held a deed to a condo in Vancouver and a letter, handwritten. "My husband, forgive me for the years I let your contributions go unrecognized. I never forgot. I only hoped someday they would see what I always knew. If they couldn't, then let this speak louder than I ever could. You built this with me. Now let the world know your name." Rebecca stood frozen, face white. Her husband began frantically typing on his phone, probably calling a lawyer. I looked around at the room full of people who had rehearsed their spending plans on the drive over, and I said nothing. Because justice doesn't require noise. It just needs truth. I gathered my coat. It was the same old Navy one they'd called embarrassing last Thanksgiving. I walked slowly past Rebecca, whose hand was clenched into a fist on the polished table. As I reached the door, I turned to Mr. Alden. "Will that be all?" He nodded. "Enjoy Vancouver." And I did, but not before turning back to the family I had fed, supported, sheltered, and finally outlived in spirit. "You buried me while I was still thinking," I said, steady. Too bad I had one more idea left. The silence after the will reading wasn't just awkward, it was bone deep. But I wasn't done. Mr. Alden knew that. He motioned for the second envelope. "This," he said, unfolding the packet with gloved care, "pertains to an intellectual property matter not previously disclosed to the family." He laid a series of documents before the room. 20 years ago, shortly before Chun Industries avoided bankruptcy through a transformative digital expansion strategy, an anonymous proposal was submitted by mail. The strategy presented in that proposal became the blueprint for the company's growth trajectory. He turned to page 2. This intellectual property was formally registered under a pseudonym. Montgomery at the time assumed to be an external consultant. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What does this have to do with anything?" "It was Mom's company, her strategy." Mr. Alden calmly flipped to the third page. "It has everything to do with this, Ms. Chun, because we recently concluded forensic analysis on the original documents of that proposal, including handwriting comparison, ink dating, and postal submission verification." He slid a certificate across the table. "The pseudonym was his," he said, pointing to me. "Your father, David Chun." Gasps. Even the air in the room seemed to hesitate. "This," he continued, holding up a framed certificate, "is the formal recognition of David Chun as sole intellectual contributor to copyright registration PA 2294157, also known as the Chun Digital Transformation Framework. The copyright now yields licensing fees through multiple implementation streams, amounting to $6.8 million annually." Rebecca's husband clutched his phone. Catherine, my granddaughter, dropped her bag. But Rebecca stammered. "He made dinner. He did laundry." And Mr. Alden allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "Yes, and he saved your mother's legacy." He pulled a folded letter from a separate envelope, slightly aged, but still crisp. "Before her passing, Mrs. Chun left this personal note, sealed and notarized." He cleared his throat and read aloud. "He found the solution before the world knew we had a problem. He kept quiet because he loved me. I asked him to let me take the credit because the board wouldn't trust a strategy from someone without an MBA. But I knew. I always knew. This company is his mind on paper." A sharp breath from the back of the room, the kind that belongs to someone realizing everything they thought they knew has shattered like glass. Rebecca muttered something under her breath. "What was that?" I asked, meeting her eyes. She looked up, finally looked at me. "I didn't know," she said, voice quieter. "I didn't know it was you." I didn't answer, because I'd spent years erasing my name so her mother could be seen as a complete success. I'd kept my name off the presentations. I'd destroyed early drafts. I'd even mailed the final proposal from a different city. But I hadn't forgotten. Mr. Alden passed the room one last page, a ledger of every quarterly payout the copyright had earned since registration, all deposited to a separate trust, untouched, accumulating. "Here," he said, handing me a portfolio with gold trim. "It's yours now." Catherine spoke up, her voice strangely small. "So, we were living off his mind all along." No one replied. They were all too busy staring at their reflections in the glass walls, wondering how they missed the most important contributor in the house because he was wearing an apron instead of a suit. I stood. They didn't stop me. Not this time. "I drew the map," I said quietly, buttoning my coat. "And you all assumed it appeared by accident." No one moved as I left. The same man who'd once been dismissed as furniture, as background noise, had just reminded them that empires are built on minds too humble to demand recognition and too strong to stay erased forever. 6 months later, there was a knock at my door in Vancouver. I opened it to find Rebecca standing there. No makeup, hair pulled back simply, wearing jeans and a plain sweater. She looked like the daughter I used to know. "Dad," she said, voice breaking. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. She sat on my modest couch, looking around at my simple apartment. No grandfather clock, no designer furniture, just clean lines and ocean views. "I've been in therapy," she began, "4 times a week. Dr. Santos asked me when I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as an obstacle." I couldn't answer her. I waited. I kept asking myself, how did I become that person? The one who put stickers on your life? The one who joked about your pension while you sat alone, eating cold food? Her voice cracked. You taught me to read, Dad. You came to every recital. You stayed up all night helping me with my science fair project. And I treated you like garbage. You did, I said simply. She flinched at the truth, but didn't look away. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, she continued. Dr. Santos says that's something you give when you're ready, not something I get to demand. I'm here to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the cruelty. I'm sorry for measuring your worth by dollars instead of decades of devotion. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. People can change, I said finally, but only if they choose to. Are you choosing to? Yes, she whispered. I want to be someone you'd be proud of again. I want to be someone I can be proud of. I was quiet for a long moment. Then prove it. Not with words, with actions. Not to me, to yourself first. She nodded, tears falling. Will you have coffee with me? Next Saturday? I'm not asking to be let back in. I'm asking for a chance to show you I'm different. I thought about it carefully. Some wounds need air before they can heal. One coffee, I said, and we'll see. She stood, wiping her eyes. Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me completely. I never gave up on you, I said. I gave up on who you were choosing to be. The question is whether you'll choose differently now. As she left, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. Because redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a different future, one honest conversation at a time. Life lessons learned. If you've read this far, let me leave you with what I've learned. 1. Silence is not the same as peace. I thought keeping quiet would preserve harmony. Instead, it taught my family that my voice didn't matter. Speak your truth kindly, but clearly. 2. Document everything. Love doesn't require proof, but justice does. Protect yourself not because you expect betrayal, but because you respect yourself enough to be prepared. 3. Your contributions matter, even when invisible. Cooking meals, managing households, creating strategies behind the scenes, all of it matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. 4. Forgiveness is not forgetting. You can forgive and still maintain boundaries. You can rebuild trust without pretending the breaking never happened. 5. It's never too late to stand up. Whether you're 30 or 70 or 90, you always have the right to say enough, to reclaim your dignity, to demand to be seen. 6. Teach people how to treat you. If you accept crumbs, that's what they'll give you. Demand respect, recognition, and reciprocity. 7. Legacy isn't what you leave, it's how you live. I could have left millions and been forgotten in a week. Instead, I left lessons. Those will last generations. 8. The people who love you will rise to meet you. When I finally spoke up, some walked away. But Rebecca chose to grow. Let people make that choice. 9. Building is better than burning. I could have destroyed my family with revenge. Instead, I'm building bridges with those willing to cross. Build, don't burn. 10. You are not a burden. Say it with me. You are not a burden. Your needs are valid. Your voice matters. Your presence is a gift, not an imposition. 2 years later, I'm 72 now. Every morning, I wake up in my Vancouver condo, make coffee, and watch the sunrise over the water. Rebecca and I meet every Saturday. It's not perfect. Some conversations are still difficult, but we're building something new, something based on honesty instead of assumption. Last month, she started a foundation with her portion of the estate that remained, Invisible Caregivers Initiative. It helps spouses and family members who've sacrificed careers and recognition for others, ensuring their contributions are documented and valued. My grandson works there too. He's learning to see people instead of price tags. The copyright royalties continue. I've used them to fund scholarships for late bloomers, people over 50 starting new careers or finally pursuing deferred dreams. Last week, a 68-year-old man came to my support group. He'd spent 40 years supporting his wife's medical practice, managing everything behind the scenes. She'd recently left him with nothing, claiming he'd never contributed. I looked at him across the table and said, "Tell me everything. Every system you created, every problem you solved. We'll find the evidence." He started crying. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I believe you, I said, because I was you. We found his fingerprints all over the practice's operational systems. We proved he'd developed the patient scheduling software, the billing protocols, the insurance claim procedures that made the practice profitable. He got his settlement. He got his recognition. He got his life back. That's the work now. Helping people find their voices after years of silence. Helping them see that quiet doesn't mean powerless. 2 years after the will reading, I received an invitation. My youngest granddaughter, Catherine, was getting married. The invitation was handwritten, not printed, and it included a note. Grandpa, I'd be honored if you'd walk me down the aisle. Not because my mom can't, but because I want the man who taught me that real strength is quiet dignity to be the one who gives me away. You showed me that being strong doesn't mean being loud. It means knowing your worth even when others forget it. I love you. See, I cried reading it. On the day of the wedding, I wore my best suit, one I'd bought with my copyright royalties. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to honor the moment. Catherine was radiant. As we stood in the hallway waiting for our cue to walk, she turned to me. Grandpa, I've been thinking a lot about what kind of wife I want to be. What kind of partner? And what have you decided? I asked. I want to be the kind who sees my husband, really sees him, who doesn't take his sacrifices for granted, who builds with him, not on top of him. She paused. I don't want to repeat the mistakes our family made with you. Your mother is learning, I said gently. We all are. That's the beauty of it. We get to keep learning, keep growing, keep choosing better until we run out of time. Will you teach my fiancé too? She asked. About balance, about partnership, about how to support each other without disappearing. I'd be honored, I said. The music started. The doors opened. As we walked down the aisle, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, whole. Not because I'd won some victory, not because I'd proven my worth, but because I'd survived the darkness and come out still capable of joy. That evening at the reception, Rebecca stood to give a toast. Most of you know that our family went through something difficult a few years ago, something that nearly destroyed us. I won't go into details, but I will say this. My father taught me the most important lesson of my life when he refused to let us erase him. For years, I thought strength meant being the most successful, the most visible, the one with the biggest title. But Dad showed me that real strength is knowing your worth even when no one else does. It's holding on to your truth even when everyone tries to rewrite it. It's building something meaningful out of the ashes of being underestimated. Dad, you saved Mom's company. You wrote the strategy that generated millions. You raised me, supported me, loved me even when I didn't deserve it. And when we tried to erase you, you didn't just fight back. You reminded us who you were. Not with anger, but with evidence. Not with bitterness, but with truth. So here's to David Chun, the invisible man who was never invisible at all. We just weren't looking closely enough. We are now, and we won't stop. She raised her glass. To Dad, to Grandpa, to the man who taught us that being quiet is a choice, but so is being heard. The room erupted in applause. I caught Rebecca's eye across the room. She smiled a real smile, the kind I remembered from when she was little, and I smiled back. Because this is what redemption looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Then the first success. 3 years after the will reading, the Invisible Caregivers initiative had helped over 500 people reclaim their stories. One case particularly moved me. A 71-year-old man named Thomas came to us. He'd spent 45 years as a stay-at-home father while his wife built a tech empire. When she died, her children from a previous marriage contested the will, claiming Thomas had contributed nothing and deserved nothing. They had security footage of him cooking, cleaning, driving the kids to activities. They used it as evidence of his lack of contribution to the business. Rebecca and her team flipped the narrative. They brought in economists who calculated the monetary value of his domestic labor, childcare, household management, personal assistance, event planning. Over 45 years, his contribution was valued at over $8 million in services that would have cost that much to outsource. But more importantly, they found something else. Thomas had been his wife's sounding board for every major business decision. She'd recorded voice memos to herself, hundreds of them, where she'd say things like, "Thomas suggested I look at the international market," or "Thomas pointed out the flaw in the merger terms." His voice wasn't on the recordings, but his influence was undeniable. The judge ruled in Thomas's favor. He received his rightful inheritance and a formal acknowledgement of his contributions. At the celebration dinner, Thomas hugged me and said, "You gave me my life back. How can I ever repay you?" "Pay it forward," I said. "Help the next person who feels invisible." That's how we changed the world, one story at a time. At 73, I became an unlikely public speaker. Universities invited me to talk about partnership dynamics. Business schools wanted me to discuss invisible labor and entrepreneurship. Family law conferences asked me to keynote about documentation and equity. One speech at Stanford particularly resonated. The auditorium was packed, over 800 people. I stood at the podium and began. "My name is David Chun. For most of my life, I was invisible, not because I was absent, but because I chose to be quiet. I told myself this was love. I told myself this was support. I was wrong. There's a difference between being supportive and being silent, between being humble and being erased. It took me 70 years in a utility room to learn that difference. I'm here today because someone in this room is living my story right now. You're the spouse who put your career on hold, the parent who sacrificed your dreams, the partner who always gives more than you receive. And maybe, like me, you've woken up to discover that your generosity was mistaken for weakness. I'm here to tell you, your value is not determined by other people's recognition. You matter because you exist, not because someone finally noticed you exist. Setting boundaries is not selfish. For years, I told myself that asking for credit was arrogant, that demanding respect was aggressive. I was wrong. Boundaries aren't walls, they fences that show where your property begins. And most importantly, it's never too late to reclaim your voice. I was 70 years old, eating cold chicken in a utility room when I decided I was done being quiet. 70. Some of you might think that's too old to start over. You're wrong. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I'm not here to tell you to punish people who wronged you. Yes, there were consequences in my story. Yes, there was accountability. But revenge wasn't the goal, truth was. And truth creates space for healing that revenge never can. My daughter is here today. We meet every week now. It's not perfect. Some conversations are still hard. But we're building something new, something based on honesty instead of obligation. My grandson volunteers at our foundation. He's learning to see people instead of opportunities. And me? I'm learning that being visible doesn't mean being loud. It means being true. I grip the podium. If you're feeling invisible today, feeling taken for granted, feeling like your contributions don't matter, I see you. I was you. And I'm here to tell you, your silence may have protected others, but it didn't protect you. It's time to speak. Not with cruelty, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Say what you've built. Name what you've given. Claim what you've earned. And if they can't hear you, document everything. Find your people, and build a new table where your voice isn't just welcomed, it's essential. Because you are essential, whether anyone else knows it yet or not. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. Afterward, a young woman approached me, maybe 30 years old. "My husband makes 6 figures at his tech job," she said. "I manage everything else, the house, the kids, his schedule, the finances. Last week, he told his friends he's the breadwinner and I'm just at home. What should I do?" I looked at her seriously. First, document everything. Every task, every hour, every decision. Second, have an honest conversation. If he doesn't understand your value, show him the data. And third, never let anyone convince you that just at home is less than at work. Different contributions equal value. Remember that. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you. I thought I was being petty for feeling hurt." You're not petty. You're human. And you deserve to be seen. Then the unexpected reunion. 4 years after the will reading, I got a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Chun, this is Marcus, Rebecca's son, your grandson." My chest tightened. Marcus had been one of the cruelest at the estate. He'd joked about checking my pulse, about taking my pension. "I'm listening." I said carefully. I'm getting married next month, and I know I have no right to ask this, but would you come? Not to the wedding party, just to the ceremony. I want you to see who I've become. I want you to know that I'm different now. I was quiet for a long moment. Tell me who you've become, I said. He took a deep breath. I'm a social worker now. I left finance 2 years ago. I work with elderly populations, helping them navigate family dynamics, protect their assets, document their contributions. I see you in every client, Grandpa. And I'm trying to undo the person I was by helping people like you. My eyes filled with tears. I've been in therapy for 3 years, he continued. I volunteer at Mom's Foundation. I've apologized to everyone I hurt, but I can't move forward without your forgiveness. Not demanding it, just asking if you ever find it in your heart. Marcus, I said softly, forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process. But what you're describing, that's not just apologizing. That's transformation. And transformation deserves witnessing. So, you'll come. I'll come, I said. Not because you've earned it, but because I want to see the man you're becoming with my own eyes. At the wedding, Marcus introduced me to his fiancée. This is my grandfather, he said, voice thick with emotion. The man I hurt more than anyone. The man who taught me the hardest lesson of my life, that people aren't obstacles to what you want. They're the reason you want anything at all. His fiancée shook my hand warmly. He talks about you all the time, about what he learned, about the man he wants to be. After the ceremony, Marcus pulled me aside. Grandpa, I've been working on something. He handed me a leather-bound journal. I've been documenting my journey. Every therapy session, every moment of realization, every time I caught myself repeating old patterns and chose differently. I want to publish it to help other young people who are making the same mistakes I did, but only if you're okay with it. I opened a journal. The first entry was dated 6 months after the will reading. Today I realized I don't recognize myself in the mirror. The person who put stickers on Grandpa's furniture, who joked about his death, who treated him like garbage, that was me. I did that, and I don't know how to live with that knowledge. I flipped through more pages, watching his evolution unfold in real time. Publish it, I said. The world needs fewer perfect stories and more honest ones. Show them the mess. Show them the transformation. Show them that change is possible. He hugged me then, and I felt decades of pain begin to ease. My final speech. At 75, I was invited to give a TED Talk. The topic, the power of invisible labor. I stood on that red circle and shared my story with millions. But I ended with something I'd never said publicly before. Here's what I want you to understand. This story isn't really about money or inheritance or even justice. It's about seeing each other. We live in a world that celebrates the visible, the CEOs, the award winners, the people on magazine covers. But behind every visible success, there are invisible hands. The spouse who manages the chaos, the parent who sacrifices their ambition, the partner who builds the foundation while someone else builds the tower. Those hands matter. I'm asking you to do something radical. Go home tonight and really see the people in your life. Not what they do for you, but who they are. Not their function, but their humanity. Thank them, not with empty words, but with recognition, with equity, with partnership that honors all contributions equally. Because here's the truth. I didn't win when I got my inheritance back. I won when my daughter looked me in the eyes and really saw me for the first time in decades. When my grandson transformed his guilt into purpose. When my granddaughter chose to build her marriage differently. That's the real inheritance, not money, but consciousness. Not revenge, but restoration. Not bitterness, but the choice to be better. So I'll leave you with this. If there's someone in your life who's been quietly holding things together, don't wait until they're in a utility room to tell them they matter. Don't wait for a will reading to acknowledge their worth. See them now. Honor them today. Because the greatest tragedy isn't being invisible, it's making someone else invisible and not realizing it until it's too late. And if you're the invisible one, like I was, hear me clearly. You are not required to stay silent. You are not required to disappear. You are allowed to take up space, to use your voice, to demand to be seen. It's never too late to step into the light. Thank you. The applause was deafening. But more importantly, my inbox filled with thousands of messages. I'm the invisible one. I'm starting to document everything. I realized I've been making my spouse invisible. We had our first real conversation in years. I'm 68 and thought it was too late. Your story gave me courage. That's when I knew. The story was never just mine. It was ours, all of us who've been erased. All of us who've done the erasing. All of us trying to do better. I'm 76 now. Rebecca and I have coffee every Saturday morning. We've built something new, not perfect, but honest. The foundation has helped thousands. Marcus runs the youth outreach program. Catherine serves on the board. Last week, I got a letter from a 70-year-old woman in Ohio. Dear Mr. Chun, I watched your TED Talk 3 months ago. I've been married 48 years. My husband built a business empire while I raised our children and managed everything else. Last week, he introduced me at a party as the wife and couldn't name a single thing I've contributed to our success. I went home and found your talk again. I cried for 3 hours. Then I pulled out my journals, my calendars, my bank statements. I documented everything. Yesterday, we had the most honest conversation of our marriage. He cried. I cried. We're in couples therapy now, but for the first time in decades, I feel seen. Thank you for teaching me I'm allowed to take up space. I keep that letter on my desk because that's the work, not just my story, but creating space for everyone's story. Sometimes Rebecca asks me if I regret the quiet years, if I wish I'd spoken up sooner. No, I tell her honestly, because everything, even the pain, brought me here, to this moment, to this understanding, to this purpose. And if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, she asks. I think about it carefully. I'd tell him, your voice is not a burden. Your needs are not selfish. Your worth is not determined by how much you're willing to disappear. Hold on to yourself even as you love others. Because you can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't build a life on a foundation of erasure. She nods, writing it down. She's working on a book, The Invisible Parent, A Daughter's Reckoning. Will you read it before I publish? She asks. Every word, I promise. The wisdom I carry now. As I sit here in my Vancouver condo, watching the sun set over the water, I think about everything I've learned. Life taught me that love without boundaries becomes martyrdom. Humility without voice becomes invisibility. Sacrifice without recognition becomes resentment. Partnership without equity becomes exploitation. Silence without choice becomes erasure. But life also taught me that it's never too late to speak up. Redemption is possible when people choose growth. Documentation is power when memory fails. Your story matters, even when others forget it. Being quiet is different from being silenced. You can forgive without forgetting. You can hold people accountable and still love them. The best revenge is living well and helping others do the same. Most importantly, life taught me, you are not invisible. You never were. You're just surrounded by people who forgot how to see. And that's their loss, not your lack. My message to you, if you've read this entire story, thank you for bearing witness, for listening, for seeing not just me, but perhaps yourself in these words. If you're the invisible one, speak, document, claim your worth. It's not too late. If you're the one who's been blind, open your eyes. Ask questions. Make amends. It's not too late. If you're somewhere in between, pay attention to yourself, to others, to the quiet voices that deserve to be heard. We all have a choice to erase or to honor, to silence or to amplify, to forget or to remember. Choose wisely, choose kindly, choose honestly, because in the end, the legacy we leave isn't measured in dollars or empires or inheritance disputes. It's measured in how we made people feel, in whether we saw them, in whether we honored their humanity even when it was inconvenient. My wife saw me at the end. My daughter sees me now. My grandchildren are learning to see others. That's the real inheritance. That's what lasts. Not money, not property, not even justice. Just being seen. Really, truly seen. And seeing others in return. They say every story needs an ending. But I don't think my story has ended, it's just evolved. From invisible to visible. From silent to heard. From erased to essential. And if an old man who spent decades in the background can find his voice at 70, then anyone can. Your age doesn't disqualify you. Your past doesn't define you. Your silence until now doesn't mean silence forever. You have a voice. Use it. You have a story. Tell it. You have worth. Claim it. And to everyone who's still sitting in their version of that utility room, wondering if anyone sees them, wondering if they matter, wondering if it's too late. I see you. You matter. It's not too late. Stand up. Speak up. Show up for yourself. The world is waiting to hear your voice. Don't make them wait any longer. Being humble is beautiful. Being invisible is tragic. Know the difference. From David Chun. If the story stirred your soil, subscribe to Voices of Uncle Ben channel for more stories of heart, honesty, and timeless wisdom. Share your own story in the comments below. Let's build a community where every voice matters and nobody gets left behind. See you next Thursday. And bring your own light. New stories every Thursday.